material. And when we're in material consciousness, we are affected by the changes in the material world. And everything in the material world goes through 7 stages. Conception. Conception. Something has to be conceived before it can exist. Whether it's an idea, or a body, or a design for something that you make, or whatever. It starts from the conception. It starts from an abstract. Okay? Then what? Gestation. It has to build. It has to generate. It has to go through a process of nourishment and growth until birth. Right. It comes out from the unmanifest stage into the manifest stage. Okay, then what? Growth, like childhood, youth, and then adulthood. And what happens in adulthood? Creation of byproducts. In other words, work and reproduction. Anyone who's been married knows that those two things go together. The more you want to reproduce, the more you have to work. Just taking care of kids is an enormous piece of work. I mean, for 20 years, you're like changing diapers and buying prom dresses and, you know, driving to soccer games and, you know, it's a long sentence. So, production of byproducts, and then, once the kids are grown up, dwindling. Yes, one starts to dwindle. The body starts to, as you can see, that has not affected me at all. Old age, dwindling. And then what? Death. Means a change of body, a change of phase from existent to non-existent. So, conception, gestation, birth, growth, production of byproducts, dwindling, and death. These are the 7 stages that affect every manifestation in the living world, in the material world. So any bodies that we have, any possessions that we have, any relationships that we have, anything that we have any relationship with in this material world is going through these 7 stages. And these changes produce suffering. Okay? Nobody wants their relationships to end. Nobody wants their possessions to be taken away. Nobody wants to get old and die. Nobody wants things to change. They all want to keep the stuff that they've worked for, and absolutely none of this is possible. In the material world, everything is subject to the material laws. Everything is affected by time. Everything eventually grows old and wears out and goes away. So even if we are operating in the mode of goodness, which we highly recommend, by the way, highly recommend that you eat in the mode of goodness, that you do everything you can in the mode of goodness, because this will lead to happiness and prosperity and health and strength and intelligence. And this will ultimately lead to spiritual life. In spiritual life, we take our material activities, and instead of performing them for material gain, we perform them as a service, as a sacrifice to Krishna, to God. And when we do that, guess what happens? We become released from the karmic reaction to those activities. Instead of karmic reaction, we get spiritual advancement. That is the secret of devotional service. That is the operative principle of devotional service. Instead of karma, it's called akarma. Karma means work. Karma means cause and effect. It's what's called fruitive activities. All these activities in the material world are undertaken to produce some fruit, some result. Huh? Nobody does any work in this material world unless they want to get some result out of it, except the devotees. The devotees are performing activities that have no material result, like chanting the holy name, for example. What material result does that have? Some people think that we're crazy because we do that. Crazy like a fox. Because we chant these holy names, because we do so many other things that have no material results whatsoever, we are excused from the karma. Because all of these activities are done as an offering to Krishna. And ultimately, as described in the Nectar of Devotion, these kind of activities over a long period of time result in our developing love of Krishna. And when we develop love of Krishna, this transforms our consciousness from material to spiritual. The transformation begins when we take our regular material activities and offer them to Krishna. And the end goal of that transformation is pure love of God. That's how it works. So then there are all these methods, so many methods. We went through a long examination, detailed look at all the different methods. And also we looked at the offenses, the things that stop the methods from working, and how to overcome. Well, we didn't really talk too much about how to overcome the offenses. That might be another topic that we would want to go into at some point. But so far, the Nectar of Devotion has talked about once we reach the point where our intelligence has matured by the mode of goodness, to the point where we can see, okay, I want out of here. I don't want to be in the material world anymore. I want to attain the spiritual world. Once we get to that point, that is where Nectar of Devotion begins. Okay? Most spiritual paths, they end at the point where we say, I want to get out of this material world because I'm a spiritual living being. I'm a spiritual living entity. I am a spirit soul. I am a being of pure consciousness. I'm not a being, I'm not this body, I'm not a member of this world, I'm not a member of time or affected by time, I'm eternal. And when we declare our identity to be completely spiritual, that is actually the goal or the end point of most spiritual paths. But for us, it's just the beginning. This is the minimum qualification for entering this path of devotional service described in Nectar of Devotion. And sure enough, if you look in Bhagavad-gītā, this truth of our spiritual identity is the first point, well, almost the first, the second point that Krishna makes. The first point is, Arjuna, you're a fool because you're lamenting. If you're lamenting, means you think you're a material being. Therefore, declare that you are a spiritual living entity, and this is the beginning of the solution to all of your problems. And then the next step is, in chapter 3, take this activity, all this material work that you've been doing, and offer it to the Lord. And then you become released from the karma, you become free from the reaction, and you can go on and attain liberation like that. So Krishna sums up the process in a few verses, but Nectar of Devotion explains it in detail, great detail, astonishing detail. And Nectar of Devotion is leading up to something too. You notice throughout the description of the process of devotional service, there have been many, many quotations from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. That's because Nectar of Devotion is an analysis of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. See, in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the topics are presented in a certain order, according to the levels of advancement of consciousness. But they're not analyzed in that way. They're simply presented more or less unsystematically. Well, here's a story, and then, oh, what's your question? Well, that reminds me of another story. Here's this other story, and then on and on. Sometimes there's stories within stories within stories, and so on. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is wonderful. It's like an encyclopedia. Its scope is just so vast. Nectar of Devotion takes all that material and it puts it in a specific order